The end is nigh. The end of the year, not capital E, the end. Well, maybe. That is not off the table, but today at least, the end of the year is upon us, and I want to do one final push to use up more of my scrap stash. This looks worse than it is, because I kind of just piled stuff together to get it all in the frame. But I have a short list of projects that I've wanted to make with my scraps that I haven't gotten around to yet. So now's the time. We're gonna get around to it. We're gonna get it done and continue to just keep the scrap pile manageable and organized. I think the first thing I need to do is really just get my hands in here and see what I have. Pull out the things that I know what I want to use them for. Start making piles of things that can work for the other projects I have in mind. So I guess I'll start with a little bit of sorting and seeing what I have to work with. The first step of any scrap fabric stash busting for me is always sorting my crazy piles, especially the blue bin I keep under my desk to just throw scraps into as I'm working. I try to sort this every few months, separating out anything too small to use into my bag of stuff to shred for stuffing, and sorting anything usable into my purple bins where I sort similar fabrics together. After the initial sorting, I went through the piles and put aside anything that I had a project idea for. It always looks worse before it gets better. So a couple ongoing things I have with the scraps that are just too small to really make anything with is putting them in this bag to be shredded at some point. So right now I am working on filling up this pillowcase. Additionally, I am also taking little squares of all the fabric I have just to have a box of fabric samples in case I need to do any planning. I've also used this to help some people with interior design choices, so we just have fabric swatches to make plans with, so that's kind of helpful. So as I'm sorting through my scraps, I'll just make little squares or rectangles, usually with the pinking shears, so it has that nice cleaned up edge. And then for whatever reason, I have felt compelled to cut the really tiny pieces into tiny little rectangles or squares. I don't know what I'm gonna do with these yet. I felt like I needed to make them. I feel like I'm saving them for some kind of future art project. I don't know what that'll be, and if it's too small to make a rectangle out of, it goes in the shred bag. Those are a few miscellaneous things. Now let's jump into making some stuff. The first thing I want to tackle, since it is more time sensitive, are some Christmas projects using these leftover tartan print fabrics. I'm going to start with the tiniest scraps here, and I want to make a few ornaments to gift some friends and family. So I really truly thought I would have this video out at least a few days before Christmas, but life had other plans, clearly. So anyway, I hope you like these ideas to pocket away into your brain for next year, I guess. Anyway, I first made templates for my ornaments using some scrap cardboard. These were as big as I could make them to still fit on the narrow scraps of fabric that I had to work with, so my ornaments would be pretty small once seam allowance was accounted for. I also used this as a chance to use up most of my fusible interfacing scraps, adding them to all of the ornament fabric to stabilize it. I then traced a front and back for each ornament I wanted to make, and because I wanted to make this as difficult for myself as possible, decided to embroider family names on these for each of the recipients. This added at least a week onto the time it took to finish these, but I thought personalizing it would make them much more special. I basted a small loop of ribbon onto the front of the ornament before attaching the fronts and backs with right sides together. I kept the seam allowances as small as I reasonably could and left a small opening to flip them right sides out. I clipped the corners before absolutely struggling to turn these tiny suckers right sides out, apparently so much so that I didn't even bother to film it and I just moved on to showing you how I stuffed it with shredded scraps. Tiny projects like these can be so cute, but they are oh so tedious. If I'd had more fabric to work with, I would have sized these up, and if the material were more sturdy, I would have hand sewn them together with wrong sides touching and maybe done a blanket stitch around the edges as a closure. Alas, those were not what I was working with. But despite those challenges, I still think they turned out really cute, and I even made one to keep for my husband and myself. The second Christmas item I wanted to make was a new set of stockings. I had made us a set 5 years ago that I still do like, but I wanted to change it up a bit this year. Again, I started with a cardboard template. The great thing about stockings is they're kind of a blobby shape, so you can really freehand the shape however you want. Just remember to account for seam allowance. I cut out the body of the stockings from some scraps of a tartan flannel bedsheet, then used some of this red bedsheet from my stash for the lining. I thought having a peak of this bold color on the inside that echoes the red line through the tartan would be more fun than a black lining. I was torn between these two fabrics for the cuff, so I asked you guys over on Instagram and I asked my husband. Both chose the velvet fabric. I say velvet, but it almost feels like a corduroy as well. It's kind of in between. Since it was a thrifted curtain, the folded hem was actually already the perfect length, so I just cut that off and opened it up, using the crease as the top of the cuff and leaving a wide seam allowance below that. I then cleaned up the bottom of the cuff so the fabric wouldn't continue to shed before sewing the sides together to make a loop. I attached this to the tartan fabric with right sides of both facing out. I added a loop of ribbon at the back before pulling the lining over the rest of the stocking with right sides of the lining touching right sides of the cuff and tartan, and again attaching it along the top edge. This ended up being easier for me to do with the lining flipped inside so that I was looking at the wrong side of the tartan, but the effect is the same. Then I flipped everything right sides out through the hole left in the lining, and I closed the opening by stitching close to the fold. Next, I wanted to make something purely functional, and this sturdy, ugly grayish fabric was the ideal choice. My husband is somehow always bringing home stray nitrile gloves in his work clothes, unused and clean, so I wanted somewhere for them to live where we can make use of them. They're great for cleaning or messy craft projects. What I had in mind was kind of an oversized version of an 18th century tie-on pocket that I could hang up somewhere. For reasons I cannot explain, I also decided to make it kind of this long trapezoidal shape. I don't know guys, I was just rolling with the vision in my head. I made a slit down the front for the opening, then used a salvaged piece of bias tape to make an edge binding by folding it in half to make it double fold. I sandwiched the sides of the front opening into the bias tape, folding the excess around the corners. I could then attach the front and the back of the pocket right sides together, clip my corners, and turn everything right sides out. The last thing I did was add 2 large eyelets at the top corners from which to hang my pocket. This is far from the cutest thing I've ever made, and again, I can't really explain some of the design choices I made other than just going with what felt right to me, but it serves the purpose I needed it to, which is really all I was asking for with this one. And while we're on the subject of pockets, I also made an actual tie-on pocket using this fabric sample. I've already made one of these that I embroidered and then bound the edges by hand with double fold bias tape, but that took forever. I wanted this next one to be simpler and quicker to make. Also, please don't waste your hard-earned money buying a $5 pattern off Etsy for the shape of these pockets. You can totally just freehand this shape on a piece of printer paper. It's basically a teardrop shape with the top cut off and a slit about halfway down the center front piece. To clean up the front opening, I again used a scrap of leftover bias tape, but this time turned it toward the inside of the pocket rather than folding it around the edge. It was really tricky to work around the bottom point of the opening, so I folded the excess around the turn as best I could. It doesn't look amazing from the inside, but it looks clean and non-wonky from the outside, which is good enough for me. Then I sewed front to back with right sides together, leaving a couple inches open on either side at the top for a belt to loop through. Once this was flipped right sides out, I folded in the edge around these openings and hand stitched it in place. This was such a simple project that you could easily make in an afternoon, and a great addition to any pesky outfit that lacks a pocket. I also made a few more tissue box covers, but I won't be going into depth on those since I covered that in my last scrap busting video in May. The gist of it though is to create panels to cover the top and 4 sides in whatever way will fit on your fabric, including seam allowance, as well as a piece to make a facing for the top opening. Then you really just put it together. That's kind of it. That's most sewing videos actually. You cut out the pieces and then you put them together. The end. Finally, it was well past time that I tackle one of my ongoing scrap projects. Throughout this year, I've been making diamond shapes from my smaller scrap pieces, sorting them into 2 different color scheme groups. I figured I had more than enough of the darker autumnal colors to start patching them together. My hope was to have enough to make a cover for my serger. As I started laying them out, however, I realized I didn't quite love the black diamonds mixed in with the rest of the colors, so I backtracked to sort all the colors into piles before trying the layout again. This gave me a lot less fabric to work with, but I liked the look much better. Then began the long, tedious slog of sewing them all together, first into rows and then connecting those rows. I do wish I had added stabilizer to some of the flimsier fabrics, and I definitely will be doing that for any further patchwork projects I make with the leftover diamonds, but since this project is not going to be weight-bearing, just a decorative cover, it turned out okay. I then used some of this black bedsheet from my stash to make a mock-up for my serger, using the same dimensions as the plastic cover it came with. I intended to use this mock-up as a lining for the backside of the patchwork to cover all of the seams, but when I sewed them together, the patchwork stretched a little bit and they didn't line up quite right. So I tried again by pinning the patchwork to a larger piece of black fabric and sewing it along each side from the top of the patchwork and cut off the excess black fabric. I didn't have enough of the patchwork to make full sides for the cover, so I made the sides out of the black mock-up fabric with a pocket on top made from the patchwork. I bound the top of the patchwork pockets with double fold bias tape before attaching them to the sides. I don't really need pockets for this machine right now, but they might be useful in the future if I ever need to store it unplugged so that there's somewhere to put the wires and the pedal. I then attached the sides to the main body of the cover by matching up their center points and placing them right sides together, first sewing only the top of the side panels on. From there, I sewed the remaining seams together, starting at the center, moving outward toward the bottom. I trimmed off any excess fabric at the bottom, then bound the bottom edge in double fold black bias tape. I'm not in love with all of my design choices for this, like I wish I had rounded the corners instead of keeping them square, but I do really like how the patchwork itself turned out, and it's much cuter than the factory issue cover that came with this machine. So I do still have this bag full of longer, smaller pieces that I intend to turn into scrunchies and headbands, like really basic stuff that you can find a million tutorials on online already. But I'm done. I am done for this video. I will be chipping away at this over the next couple of weeks off camera because I am so tired. This month has really kicked my butt. My butt is thoroughly kicked, so that's where I'm gonna end it. If you made it to the end of this video, leave whatever emoji you want. Leave something that will confuse the other people in the comments section who haven't watched the whole video. Thank you for watching this video, and thank you guys so much for all of your support on this channel the past year. I hope that you're able to get some rest going into the new year, and I will see you there. All right, that's it. See ya. Why are you so wobbly? Why are you the wobbliest ironing board in the world?